Imagine a world millions of years in the future. A world where evolution has written a new chapter in the story of life. The world is inhabited by very strange creatures, like nothing the Earth has ever seen. 5 million years in the future, and the planet is in the grip of another ice age. Yet this isn't ice or snow. It's salt, covering a hot, parched desert. But there is life here. Cryptiles, half-meter-long lizards that sprint over the burning salt. These harsh salt flats are 2,000 meters below sea level. They're all that's left of the sparkling, clear blue waters of the Mediterranean. But how can a whole sea just disappear? What happened to turn the holiday paradise of the Mediterranean into a salt desert? An ice age climate is very dry, which makes water evaporate and sea levels fall. But it takes more than a change in climate to make the Mediterranean dry out. In 5 million years' time, the geography of the Earth will have changed, when Africa will have pushed up against Europe and closed the Straits of Gibraltar. As the continents collide, the Mediterranean is cut off from the Atlantic and it becomes a closed, landlocked sea. The water evaporated in the dry climate, and with no water flowing in from the Atlantic to replace it, the Mediterranean simply vanished, leaving just a few deep basins.
The Mediterranean will dry out until it becomes one vast salt pan. There will be small lakes of hypersaline water left behind, the only water in the Mediterranean. But the old holiday islands of Cyprus and Malta and Crete will stand up as small mountains in the middle of this sea of salt.
No shelter and no water, just the relentless sun. But if anything can survive out here, lizards can. These cryptiles, like many lizards, are tough and drought resistant, so they're already suited to life on the salt flats.
Well, in 5 million years, the Mediterranean will be a very different environment than it is today. And very few animals will have actually adapted purely for that new environment. The cryptile is a great example of one animal that's testing the water. It's part of the way there, but not all the way there yet.
Lizards in general are good at surviving in hot, dry places. Today, the Lake Eyre dragon lives on the vast salt flats of Australia's Lake Eyre, a dry salt pan covering 10,000 square kilometers. Lake Eyre dragons eat ants. Insects are the only other creatures that can survive in a salt desert like this. The lizards stand on their heels, keeping their toes off the hot surface. At over 2 million square kilometers, the Mediterranean salt flats are some 200 times as big as Lake Eyre. But cryptiles don't just live here. They also carry out their courtship on the old Mediterranean seabed. The males compete to show off the biggest and brightest crest. And the female invites the best-looking male to follow her in a courtship dash over the salt. If he keeps up with her, she'll let him mate. But for the female, her problems are only just beginning.
Now, one of the biggest problems about living in this environment, this very, very salty environment, is that if you're a lizard, there's nowhere to lay your eggs. If you dig a hole in the salt and lay them, they will just shrivel up. All the water will be taken out of them and they will be dead very quickly. So the females have to move away to find places where there's soil in order to deposit their eggs. This is a time when they're the greatest danger, because they're very well adapted for living on the open salt plain. The colour, the shape, everything is for salt plain life. When they go onto the soil, this is when they stand out like a sore thumb, and this is when they're open to be eaten by predators.
So a female has to leave the safety of the salt flats to lay her eggs. She heads for the old Mediterranean islands that rise out of the salt. These are mountains of bare rock worn into a broken, cracked pavement known as karst. Running across the karst, there are deep cracks and crevices called grikes. Although many of the cracks are only a few centimeters wide, some of them go down 2 or 3 meters. Ideal places to lay eggs. The narrowest cracks are far too tight for a predator. And there is a predator here that uses the bigger grikes as secret highways across the karst. The Cryptiles' eggs are safe in the bottom of a narrow grike. It's not the eggs that are in danger, but the Cryptile herself, from a griken. The Cryptile has the advantage of speed, so the griken will go hungry. Grikens live only on these isolated bare mountains and rocky plateaus. They're about 20 centimeters tall at the shoulder, with a sinewy body small enough to wriggle through crevices in the rock. But its ancestor had a very different lifestyle, living in the tops of trees. Today, Europe's natural vegetation is forest, and it's said if humans hadn't cleared the trees, a squirrel could run from Spain to Greece without ever touching the ground. But it would be followed all the way by a pine marten, the ancestor of the griken. Pine martens are fast, agile predators that spend most of their time in the branches. Their bodies are flexible and supple, and they have a superb sense of balance. But 5 million years in the future, in the Ice Age climate, trees will be a rare sight in Europe.
Griken has evolved in only 5 million years. It's not that different from the pine marten it evolved from, but the climate has dried, the trees have gone. Pine martens had long back legs to help them leap through the trees, and tails they'd use to help them maintain balance.
But grikens are different. They have longer legs, so they can run along the grikes. And as grikens no longer climb trees, they don't need their ancestors' long tail for balance. Their bodies have elongated, so they can squeeze through the narrow crevices in the rocks. Grikens also have dagger-like teeth. They need them to bring down their favorite prey. Small, delicate-looking pigs, Scrofas. Scrofas can't run as fast as Cryptiles, so they're easier for the Griken to catch. Especially the tender, young pigs. But the big adult males are aggressive. Too aggressive for the Griken.
We're 5 million years in the future, and Scrofas are descendants of the wild boar that used to roam over much of Europe and Asia.
Today, wild boars live in rich forests that still cover much of Europe, and they're found in many of the countries surrounding today's Mediterranean. The adults are big, heavy-set animals that can weigh more than 100 kilograms. They have sturdy, strong legs for moving across the soft forest floor. And they root around in the deep woodland soil for insects, worms, tubers, fungi. Their sensitive, flexible snouts unearth anything that's edible. They live in tight-knit family groups of a few adult females with their young and a few juveniles. Despite being at home in the forest, wild boar are just the kind of animals that would survive when their forest home disappears. In the future, they've had to adapt to living on bare limestone, and they had to do it relatively quickly as the climate changed.
The landscape the Scrofa lives in has been created very rapidly, perhaps in only a few tens of thousands of years. But the Scrofas managed to adapt to live in this landscape because pigs are highly adaptable. They're generalists, they can eat a wide variety of food types, they can live in a lot of habitats. And so the Scrofas, one of the species, managed to adapt to this new landscape.
Walking over rugged limestone is very different from trundling through a forest. Scrofa legs have become thinner and the bones elongated. They walk on the tips of their toes, giving them a strange, stiff-legged gait. But this is the most efficient way to move over hard surfaces like the karst. The whole animal is only half the height of its bulky wild boar ancestor.
The Scrofa is a small pig because it's living in a habitat where there's not a great amount of food. It's got sharp, pointed hoofs to help it move across the rocky surface, long, thin legs because it needs to move quite long distances, but also it's got to leap across the cracks in the rocks.
A pig that walks like a ballerina may seem unlikely. But there is a creature around today that has a similar design. The klipspringer. Klipspringer are antelopes that live on rocky outcrops in Africa. And they've also evolved the same tiptoe, stiff-legged gait to scramble over bare rock. The klipspringer and Scrofa are totally unrelated, but have evolved the same solution to the same problem. And so, they look very similar. In the future, Scrofas have solved the problem of moving over rock, but there's another problem to solve.
There's not a great amount of food in this landscape, and the Scrofa has a very long pointed snout, so it can actually poke down into the grikes in the rocks to find the bits of plant that are growing there. It's particularly after the roots, the tubers, the bulbs, anything that's edible.
And that includes cryptile eggs, if they're not laid deep enough. But sticking a long snout down a grike can be dangerous. Although a griken won't attack an adult Scrofa, it'll sneak up on any youngsters that wander away from the family. uses the cover of the grikes to creep closer and closer. An isolated young scrofa has no defense out in the open. The Scrofa family scatters, and the Gryken finally makes a kill. This is a huge, featureless landscape, and it's very easy to get lost. And surrounding the rocky islands, the harsh, endless salt flats, the worst place a young Scrofa could find itself. But in all the confusion after the kill, one of the baby Scrofas has lost its way. It may be an ice age, but out here in the blinding glare of the salt, 2,000 meters below sea level, it gets hot. 6 degrees hotter than the Mediterranean of today. A young Scrofa won't find anything to eat out here, and even more critically, there's nothing to drink. Dehydration is a serious danger for a small pig in this heat. There is water here, but it's lethal, much too salty to drink. As the sun evaporates the sea, it leaves behind lakes that are 10 times more salty than seawater. So finding one of these brine lakes is worse than useless for the poor Scrofa.
These hypersaline, very, very salty pools may seem the kind of habitat in which nothing can thrive, but there are animals that positively enjoy such conditions. Like the brine flies that you can find today in Lake Mono, these sorts of creatures will live there in their millions. Animals that have learned to cope with very harsh conditions sometimes profit by it.
In the future, just as today, nothing much can live in these salty lagoons other than brine flies. So they breed here in their billions. Their only food are algae that can tolerate the salt and live in the water. So the flies have to crawl underwater to feed, surrounded by an aqualung, a silvery bubble of air. This works so well that the air over the Mediterranean brine lakes is black with flies. The flies themselves don't live more than a few days, but they breed so quickly they dominate the landscape. But Scrofas can't eat brine flies. Evening brings some relief from the heat, but none from hunger or thirst. Next morning, the fierce heat will return with the sun. It's unlikely that any animal not adapted to these harsh conditions could survive more than a day here in this endless desert. It seems like there's nothing here, just flies, salt, and cryptiles. So if the Scrofa has no chance of survival, how do the Cryptiles do it? There's plenty of food around the lake. The problem is to catch it. A Cryptile trawls through the huge swarms of flies, using its large neck frill as a fishing net. And with its long tongue, it licks the trapped flies off the net as it runs.
The most amazing thing about the Cryptile is its frill. It's got this enormous great big frill which is evolved from the skin around its neck to enormous proportions, and it's got cartilage inside so it can actually erect the frill, and so it looks about as big as a saucepan when it faces you. This is the adaptation it's got ready for feeding, because this frill is like a lattice structure. It's full of holes between the scales, and there's a waxy secretion. This has a sticky, waxy secretion that covers the frill, so when it runs forward through all these flies and they're scattered in all directions, many of them get caught on this sticky frill. It's a bit like a mobile fly paper, if you like. And then it can turn around with its long tongue and lick off all those flies which it's caught on its frill. Well, the frill itself has probably evolved, as I say, from loose skin from around its neck. Things like the frill lizard living today in Australia has a big frill, so you can see how that would evolve from that. Many other lizards also have a mouth fringe as well, where they can expand the skin on the side of the mouth in order to frighten off predators. A big red flash like this would frighten off a snake or another bigger lizard. So you can see this sort of frill would have actually evolved over the course of time from extra loose skin around the neck. The Cryptile is unique. It doesn't drink. It gets all the moisture it needs from the insects, the flies that it feeds on. Flies are full of moisture, and it eats dozens and dozens every day, and that provides it with enough water for it to survive. So it never ever drinks water. It would be fatal if it actually drank some of this water. It's too salty.
So the Cryptile survives by eating and drinking flies. But a few lizards make no impact at all on these vast numbers of brine flies. The flies and the lizards can live here because they're very specialized. For anything else, life on the huge salt flats is impossible. The baby Scrofa has succumbed to the heat. Life on the barren limestone karst is almost as hard. But for the Scrofas and Grycans, it's their only home. The Ice Age swept over this world at breathtaking speed, less than 10,000 years. So only those creatures that were adaptable, like lizards, pigs, pine martens, could survive. The Ice Age, 5 million years in the future, didn't just bring frozen wastes. It dried out the Mediterranean Sea to create a vast, unforgiving desert of salt.